We're starting to get some fascinating details on what will be the largest civil action settlement in US history. It involves $26 billion proposed settlement against some of the biggest players in the pharmaceutical industry. This has to do with the opioid crisis. And joining us to talk about this is Peter Mouget. He's an attorney at the Levin Papantonio Rafferty law firm, which has been involved at the heart of this. Peter, first of all, explain what are some of the details involving the settlement? Why is it so significant?
Well, there's two main pieces to this. One is the monetary relief, and two is the injunctive. $26 billion with just 4 of the first defendants goes a long way with creating some much needed treatment, education for those that are at the heart of this epidemic. But then secondly is the injunctive relief, which I think is just as powerful as the $26 billion. There's game-changing, transformative conduct that is going to be required of the defendants that will prevent any further problems going forward and will help us get the opiate epidemic kind of abated or stopped here in the near future.
What are some of these specific steps that these pharmaceuticals, these drug makers have to now do?
The biggest component on the injunctive relief is the clearinghouse. So every single pill made in the United States, there's over 100 billion over the last 10 years, are tracked from the manufacturer to the distributor to the pharmacy. So we can trace a pill starting as it's made, rolling off into a bottle, shipped to the distributors and then shipped to the pharmacies. And what the distributors were required to do and why they have stroked a check for $21 billion is because they were supposed to design a system to identify suspicious orders of unusual size, frequency, or pattern, and they didn't do it. And once they identified a suspicious order, they were supposed to perform due diligence before it was shipped. Now, this clearinghouse is going to be run, since the defendants couldn't do it themselves, we've now hired a third party that's going to run a red flag algorithm through all of this data, pop on these suspicious orders, and ensure that due diligence is performed before the order is shipped. That will help close all of the loopholes in the system to ensure that these suspicious orders aren't making their way to pill mills across the country. That's
Peter, I wonder if you can describe what you have found in terms of the devastation to a lot of communities by the opioid crisis.
It's heartbreaking. You go into communities around the country and it's impacted communities in different magnitude. There's no doubt that there's every community in the US has been hurt, but there are communities across the country where you go to playgrounds or out in public spaces and there are needles and spoons with heroin and pill problems on every corner. There are communities in this country where you don't have to look further than the house next door or across the street to find someone that's overdosed or died. It's reached every corner of this country. It's hit every different kind of socioeconomic group, and some communities are hit worse than others. But it is hit and every single community in this country and touched families everywhere. Devastated families everywhere.
And as I understand it, a large portion of the $26 billion will go right back to these communities. How will the money be spent to try to help them, to try to fix the problem, to try to support people who are going through this?
That's one of the issues that the defendants, the state attorney generals, the local government, and private counsel all agree on. 90% of the money that's secured in this settlement and paid for over a period of years will go back to treatment and education. So as opposed to tobacco, where in a lot of instances in a lot of states, the money's ended up in the general coffers and went to fixing potholes and covering budget shortfalls. That's not going to happen with this opiate money. 90% will be spent in our communities curbing the epidemic. Everything from educating kids that pills in mom and dad's medicine cabinets are just as dangerous as drugs you get on the street corners, to treatment beds, physicians to help create treatment plans, really runs the gamut, and it's flexible enough that communities can fashion it to meet their needs, because every community in the country is not the same.
Peter, I know that a lot of lawsuits, civil lawsuits, can be very adversarial between the parties. What was it like working with and working against the pharmaceutical companies. Was it easy? Was it difficult? Was there acknowledgement from the start on their role in all of this and what they needed to do? How would you describe this whole experience as a lawyer?
That's a great question, David. And quite frankly, it runs the gamut. We had different responses from different defendants. A lot of finger pointing in the beginning, blaming doctors, victims, DEA, you name it. Everybody had a place to point the finger. Some of the defendants embraced their role in the conduct early on. Some, for example, like Walgreens is a distributor and a pharmacy that continues to refuse to engage in any settlement negotiations and look themselves in the mirror and understand that they had a role in this, just like the other parties. So it runs the gamut. And I had the opportunity to be in the middle of the litigation side and the trial side and the negotiation side. And I will tell you that the negotiators that we dealt with as the faces of the companies wanted to address the problem and find solutions as much as anybody in the room. Litigating side was a different story, but I feel like the negotiation side, they were looking for solutions as well.
I know it's a very complex case to put together when you're talking about this many defendants and this many parties and this amount of money. What was there a moment when this really seemed to sort of gel, where it really seemed like, okay, this is going to work out?
You know, if it has, it still hasn't even crystallized yet. I know that these negotiations have been ongoing for years. I focus in my practice in what I would consider to be the most complex of the complex, and this is outside the stratosphere of anything I've ever done before. Primarily to bring all of these local governments under the tent and the state governments. So up until today, we have a settlement proposal on the table. It is a Jenga game of pulling the sticks out at the bottom with it kind of. We need every single city and county and state in the country to work collaboratively together to get this across the finish line. So it continues to be very fragile going forward. And over the 6 months, only time will tell if we can all work together to get this across the finish line.
I can imagine the details of just going through the language and some of this must be remarkable. You mentioned the tobacco settlement, and while this is quite different, a lot of people point to the settlement with big tobacco as a major turning point in the war on tobacco. A number of studies suggested that tobacco use dropped significantly after that was a key inflection point. Do you see that being the same with the opioid crisis, or is there a difference in terms of the trajectory that the United States is on right now with opioids?
Well, last year, the data just came out and the deaths are up 30% from the year before, the data from the CDC. So unfortunately, we are still continue to be on the wrong trajectory. And a large part of that is as we kind of turn the spigot of pills off, we have a whole generation in our communities addicted to opiates. And they, out of desperation, they are now looking at heroin and other types of synthetics, opiates, and which are causing deaths to spike. So the pills are totally inversely correlated to heroin, and the folks that are addicted are looking for other spaces. The only thing to get us across the finish line and bring the deaths and overdoses down is going to be treatment and education. We can't arrest our way out of this problem, and we can't just cut the pills off.
And will that be the expectation that assuming the settlement does go through, somebody who a year from now looks up and says, oh my God, I'm addicted to opioids or heroin, they will have new opportunities, new avenues in their local community with which to get research, to which to get help in order to support them to wean them off of this?
David, that's our goal. We have worked with a team of experts on approved uses for 90% of the 26 billion that's going to go back into our community. So we've worked hand in hand in lockstep with those experts from the medical communities to create treatment and education programs to make sure that we start seeing these numbers trend downward over the next several years. It took us 20 years to get to this point and get to this Herculean problem we have now. It's not going to take us a year or two to dig out from it. This is a long-term problem. It's going to with a long-term solution, but hopefully we've got the building blocks in place to get us there.
And hopefully there'll be other people who are not just part of this. I'm thinking of doctors. I mean, there was the early finger pointing you mentioned at the doctors, but clearly there is a role, right, that doctors and others play in this who are not necessarily part of the settlement.
There is absolutely no question that there is blame to go around every side of the table. And it doesn't matter whether it's the regulators, it's doctors, it's everywhere. everyone's got to look in the mirror and think, what can I do to help solve this problem? And but the refusing to accept responsibility for your particular space or the company's particular space is what we need to get this epidemic stopped.
And Peter, you mentioned local governments should be part of this. If somebody sees this and says, aha, I'm a town manager in, I don't know, Southern Indiana, how do they simply reach out to your law firm and say, okay, what can we do to sort of help shape this? Is there a process for these local communities?
The eligible cities and counties across the country will be receiving notice from their state attorney generals and from if they have hired counsel, from their counsel, all within the next 30 to 45 days. So the rollout of this notice process is going to be extremely sophisticated and tremendous in scale to make sure that everybody has notice of what's happening and what programs are available.
Peter Mouget, he's an attorney with 11 Papantonio Rafferty law firm. Peter, congratulations on your work so far, and good luck to you as you try to pull this thing across the finish line.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.